Welcome to the 2020-2021 Basketball Coaches Rules Meeting. My name is Kathleen Coughlin, and I serve as the Director of Sport Management. Along with that, I am the Sport Administrator for the sport of basketball. I will also be joined in this meeting by Denny Morris, who is our Basketball Director of Development, who will speak in depth on the rules changes and necessary points of emphasis. Before we get started, I wanted to take this time to thank you. This has been a year like no other, and we appreciate your continued work with your student athletes and your flexibility and positivity as we move through a very fluid situation as it pertains to the global pandemic of COVID-19. Throughout this year, we will do our best to keep you apprised of any changes and updates, but please never hesitate to reach out with questions or concerns. Let's get started. Before you go any further, if you are using a ChromeBook, that is not to say Chrome as your type of internet browser, but a ChromeBook, we strongly recommend that you stop and use a different device to view this presentation. If you choose to proceed while using a ChromeBook, please be aware that your attendance may not be recorded or the presentation may stop midway. All users, regardless of the device that they are using while completing this presentation, should take a screenshot of the last slide. This will be proof of your completion in the event that credit is not automatically rewarded. We at the OHSAA, me in particular, will ask for that screenshot if we cannot find credit for you viewing this meeting. This meeting is required for all head basketball coaches. However, I also encourage all coaches to view this, from assistant coaches to JV coaches and even volunteer coaches. Every coach is under the same administrative regulations, so it would be a great help to you as a head coach for everyone to have the same information. The purpose of this meeting is to cover both the OHSAA administrative rules as well as the NFHS playing rules. In addition to the 2020 rules meeting, we have several resources that will be very beneficial to you prior to, during, and after the basketball season, and ask that you take some time to review these documents. First is the basketball manual, which covers all items mentioned in the rules meeting, and its purpose is really to be a one-stop shop for any rules and/or regulations in the sport of basketball. Also on the basketball web page are the 2020 general sport regulations and tournament regulations. Additionally, we house all of the basketball memos that are sent. If you are not receiving these memos through email, please let me know. These coach memos provide important information and reminders specific to the time of the year that they are sent. Tournament information will also be updated on the basketball webpage. This will be more important as we get closer to the tournament time. Lastly, we will share the governor-approved NFHS and OHSAA requirements and recommendations as they pertain to COVID-19. Be sure to work with your athletic director to ensure that not only you as the head coach, but also all of your assistant coaches, all the way down to volunteer coaches, have the necessary paperwork turned in to be board approved. That includes your pupil activity permit, and with that, you would then need to hold your CPR card, your sports first aid course, your BCI/FBI background check, the one and done NFHS Fundamentals of Coaching course, an approved concussion course, as well as the most recently put in the sudden cardiac arrest education, which is also known as Lindsay's Law. Additionally, I would strongly recommend talking with your team, or better yet, having your athletic trainer come and speak with your team just for a few minutes at the beginning of the season. They can go over the proper protocol if there is an emergency. Not every single team in the state is fortunate enough to have an athletic trainer at every practice. So I think it's important for everyone to know the basic life-saving skills, and also just something as basic as where the AED is and how to use it. This can be done just in a quick 5 to 10 minutes from either you or your athletic trainer. Thanks. It is our goal to decrease the number of ejections, as the trend that we're seeing is that they are increasing, and we're hoping that changes, but we need your help with that. So please be clear with your team about the ramifications of ejections. For players, that means that if a player gets ejected, we want them to remain supervised in the bench area. We do not want an ejected player, someone who's clearly upset, to then go off and be by themselves. So again, we need them to remain supervised. They would then be ineligible for the remainder of play that day. So if it happens in a JV game, They would then not be able to play in the varsity game after the fact. They would then also be ineligible for the next 2 contests of the level of the ejection. Now, they are able to sit and travel with the team, and they're also able to be in the locker room with the team. However, they may not wear any warm-up or uniform, and they may not participate in the warm-up process. Now, if a coach, you or one of your staff members is ejected, they must leave the facility. They cannot go up into the bleachers at that point. They need to leave the facility, go hang out in the locker room until everyone's done, and then ride back on the bus. They would also be ineligible for all remainder of play that day, as well as the next 2 contests. They may not travel or sit with the team. Now, they can go to the game, but simply as a spectator. And in that not being able to coach for the next 2, that doesn't mean sit as a spectator and text or communicate in any way with the team or any assistant coaches in terms of matchups, offenses, defenses that you're supposed to run. So again, when you are there after being ejected, if you are there as a spectator, not to coach the team. Additionally, you will need to pay the $100 fine and complete the NFHS course. Biggest takeaway from this particular slide is that there are no appeals to ejections at this point. Again, there are no appeals to the ejections. The only thing that we could potentially do is if there's a misidentification. Again, that happens sometimes if there are any kind of fights or anything that happen on the court, which again, we want to limit. But if they say number 33 was involved in the fight, and they were ejected from the game, and we can look back on video and see that it was actually not 33, it was 23, that's a misidentification. Now, the penalty would still be in place for number 23, but no longer will 33 be on the hook for something that they did not do. Again, no appeals, though, for ejections. As noted on the last slide, those ejected from a contest serve a 2-game suspension. However, there was an asterisk next to that for a reason. New in 2020, and in an effort to reduce the number of fighting incidences, we have added General Sport Regulation 14, which reads, any student or coach ejected from a contest for fighting will now be ineligible for 4 games rather than the previous penalty of 2 games. Fighting is defined by the NFHS as any attempt by a player or non-player to strike or engage an opponent in a combative manner unrelated to basketball. Such acts include, but are not limited to, attempts to strike an opponent with the arms, hands, legs, or feet. Please be sure to discuss this with student athletes and continue to remind them of the 4-game suspension fighting carries. This should not come as a shock, as it has been approved since the summer and has been included in each coach memo since that date. Very seldom does this happen, and yet it needs to be said. No matter how unfair you think it might be, no matter how lopsided you think the officiating is, no matter what you think about protecting your kids from injury, whatever the case may be, do not ever take your team off of the court and go home. Doing so will bring on an immediate coach suspension until there has been a formal meeting with the executive director and myself. Okay, now that we've talked about ejections and fighting, I much prefer to talk about SEI, which is our Sportsmanship, Ethics, and Integrity Initiative. Throughout the year, we know that there are outstanding displays of sportsmanship demonstrated by our student athletes, coaches, fans, and officials. Please share them with us. The form on the left is located on our website and can be sent directly to me. The recipient will receive a copy of the report as well as an OHSAA sportsmanship certificate. We are looking for fun and creative ways to feature these stories. Concussions have been at the forefront of injury prevention the past few years. Coaches and officials continue to have the authority to remove players who are exhibiting the signs or symptoms of concussions. All required first aid training and concussion courses help coaches with recognizing these symptoms. Reminder that any player who is removed for these symptoms from a practice or contest cannot return to participate on the same day as being removed, under no circumstances, and must be medically cleared to return to play following the proper protocols. If you are a veteran coach, you know that one of your requirements after a game is to rate your officials. This is an important part of the tournament assignment process and now is required by OHSAA Sport regulations. Rating of officials ensures the coach's input into the tournament assignment process. This rating takes place on the myOHSAA system and is password protected. If you have any questions about this process, please speak with your athletic director. Additionally, there is an opportunity to vote for officials. This is given to athletic directors, coaches, officials association secretaries, district athletic board members, assigners, and OHSAA administrative staff. I encourage you to speak with your athletic director so that you can vote consistently who you have rated and voted for well. The NFHS website has many great resources available both to you and your game day support staff. First, you will be able to locate the court diagram, which shows exactly what is needed to make sure that your floor and game setup are compliant. This is specifically important this year when we reach tournament time, as each home site will have to have proper NFHS court markings. Additionally, you will be able to find documents such as the basketball officials signal chart, instructions to and duties of the scorers and timers for basketball games, recommended basketball announcer responsibilities, and even a uniform PowerPoint that explains exactly what is and is not legal. I recommend taking a look at these resources, and some of them may even want to be printed out, laminated, and put with your scoring device to help the table staff. Being a head coach entails so many responsibilities beyond simply coaching. Sometimes overlooked is the fact that our regulations require someone to be responsible for the contest itself, even if it is a JV or freshman game. Oftentimes, especially in sub-varsity games, that someone is the head coach of the program. We have made it a point to remind coaches and athletic directors of this responsibility. These responsibilities include safeguarding officials before, during, and after a contest, dealing with unruly fans, dealing with medical emergencies, and coordinating inclement weather crisis management. We ask that you take a moment to meet with your entire coaching staff and review these items and how to handle them before the first contest. Additionally, for this year, in working with the governor's office, we ask that a compliance officer be present to handle any and all COVID-19 protocols. Since last March, we at the OHSAA have been working in collaboration with the governor's office and the Ohio Department of Health. Additionally, we have continued to work with the NFHS and other athletic associations around the country to maintain our mission, which is to serve our member schools and provide opportunities. In the fall, we created sports-specific guidance that would assist teams, coaches, and schools in carrying out their contests in the safest format possible. While we are still awaiting the approval of the winter guidance that is sports-specific, I feel confident about the following. 1. Masks should be worn by all those who are not on the playing surface. 6 feet of social distancing should be used at all times. Constant cleaning of the facility and equipment should be done. Capacity will be capped. And lastly, our office was mandated to create an observers program. Likely this season, an observer will be at one of your contests to evaluate your COVID-19 protocols. This program is meant to be educational in nature so that we can continue to offer opportunities and student athletes can continue competing in the sport they love. It seems odd to be going over outside of the season regulations right now, but this slide is just a brief explanation of what is allowed outside of the season, and we'll go into some of these in more detail within this presentation, but then there are full explanations of all of these within the basketball manual, and again, I will be sending out more detailed information within the coach memos that go out throughout the season and even in the off season. The first one we'll go over is the Sport Regulation 8.3. This is the individual instruction regulation. A lot of you guys know it as the 4-player rule. Again, school coaches are permitted to provide individual instruction outside the season of play. The intent and the purpose behind this is to permit school coaches the same opportunity that non-school coaches currently have. It offers the school coaches the ability to compete with the private instructors. However, we do want to again reiterate that 4 means 4. You cannot have more than that. And again, that's 4 individuals in the gym with the coach. So even alumni players and things like that, they count towards your 4. go over some more detail through the memos, but again, 4 means 4. And again, the only time that you can't have this is during that 28-day no contact period. Additionally, onto that 4-person rule, you can also coach players from your school in team play outside of the season. So you can coach players from your school on the different teams like AAU or travel. You cannot coach during that no contact period. And again, there remains a limit of 2 players from your school on that non-school team roster. So please reference the basketball webpage for any more details about this. In building off of the last slide, we'll talk about Sport Regulation 7.3, which is our non-interscholastic play. There is a limit of 2 players that play together on the same school team on any non-interscholastic team. So again, that's AAU, that's travel, that's club, that's even down to a church league, something very informal like that. The summary is this: the limit is 2 that played from the same school on any out-of-season team. This is not effective in July or June. Graduating seniors are not counted in this, and if they did not play for the school team last year, they are not counted for this. And lastly, 7th and 8th are separate from grades 9 through 12. Let's take a look at Sport Regulation 7, which is our non-interscholastic rule. This spells out what players and coaches can and cannot do during the season. Biggest thing is that you want to make sure you communicate with your team that players cannot work out, try out, practice, or play with any AAU, travel, club, church teams at all. Players also cannot work out, try out, practice, or play in any type of college ID camp or showcase, or when they're going on a college visit, they can't work out with the team. If you find that this has happened, you need to make sure that you sit them out immediately and contact our office. Talk to your athletic director, as this is a sport violation. And if they go ahead and play without seeking the proper ramifications, it is possible that you will have to forfeit some games. So again, as soon as you find out that this has been violated, hopefully that doesn't happen, you need to let our office know immediately. Let's take a moment to look at Bylaw 9 and how it may impact your program. First, the general information states that you may now participate in scrimmages out of state. However, regardless of what contest you are playing out of state, whether it is a scrimmage or a game, it must be classified the same for both schools. You cannot travel out of state for practice only. There must be a contest scheduled. All games must be played by official NFHS rules. All games must have licensed officials from that state, and Ohio administrative rules must be followed. The main difference between traveling to a bordering state versus a non-bordering state is the number of times that you may travel. For a bordering state, you may travel unlimited times. For a non-bordering state, you may only travel once. Let's make sure that we're aware of the different rules that surround the non-contest activities, and again, a few of these have changed. You can always refer to the general sport and basketball regulations for more information. Let's take a look at scrimmages. So per usual, 5 scrimmages are permitted. A reminder that these can be used anytime during the season and even into tournament time. Practicing with another team at any time is considered a scrimmage. Admission cannot be charged during scrimmages, regardless of how formal or informal the scrimmage is. On the preview side, one preview is permitted. They must occur between the start of the season and the first game. During these previews, only 1/2 of a normal game may be played, and admission may be charged for this event. Let's look at practice limitations. We don't have a whole lot of specific practice limitations other than junior high cannot practice with the high school teams. Those have to remain separate. There's no mandatory number of days for practices during the week or for your tryout process. These are more school decisions, and you'll want to talk to your athletic administrator. Lastly, there's not a number that you have to cap your program to. However, during COVID-19, we have looked at restricting the number of people that are sitting on your bench. Again, that number and those individuals can change from game to game, but for the actual contest, you will likely see that in the guidance as a capped number that can be on the bench. Lastly, looking at the contest limitations, 22, as it has been for multiple years, is the number of regular season contests that are permitted. However, we have increased the quarters per regular season to 120, and the quarters per day, which is an increase to 6. If you have any transfer students who will be playing on your team, the first thing you need to do is contact your athletic director. Make sure that they are aware. Make sure they are filling out the proper paperwork. You guys can work as a team to get this done, but it really is in the hands of the athletic director in terms of processing any exceptions through our office. We do have a number of exceptions, and if this student athlete meets one of those exceptions, they're going to be able to participate during the full entire season as well as the tournament. However, if a student athlete transferred but does not meet an exception, they will have to sit out, and that's the second half of the season as well as the OHSAA tournament. So for basketball, because the maximum amount of games is 22, the student will become ineligible at game 12. If you have any questions though, these need to go through your athletic department. A long way away, but always good to review, just a reminder that our sectional and district tournaments, by our Constitution, voted by our member schools, allows our district athletic boards to run the sectional and district tournament. This includes differences in draw procedures or who's assigned to which sectional and district. Please remember that our tournaments are representation based, which is what explains our qualifiers from each district. If you have any questions on that and the qualifiers, you can please simply send me an email and I can point you to the resources available on our website. We are committed to establishing and regulating regular season tournament standards in order for competition to be fair and equitable. That being said, we want to point out a few things that we do not consider a competitive advantage. Those things can include distance traveled to a contest, playing on a court multiple times, and playing on your home court. As I finish up my portion of the rules meeting, I encourage each of you to become a member of the largest basketball coaches association in the United States, the Ohio High School Basketball Coaches Association, or OHSBCA. Not only is it the largest, but they are the organization that represents your voice to our office. The OHSBCA leadership is my first call outside of our offices regarding all things basketball and even regarding general sport regulation adjustments within the state of Ohio. I would like to take this time to publicly thank them for being such a positive and helpful board in regard to the COVID-19 guidance pieces that will be shared out soon and all other aspects of preparation for this season. I will end my portion of the presentation the same way I started, with a huge thank you for your role as a coach, a mentor, and a person of stability in your student athletes' lives. In these times of instability and unrest, you have been a guiding force, and I hope you realize what an impact you have always had, but especially in 2020. In our office, I promise that we will continue with our mission of service and opportunity while advocating for all of our member schools. I ask that you continue to be positive and flexible as we head into the season, and I look forward to working with you throughout the year. If you have any additional questions, please let me know. And at this time, Denny Morris will take it over. Thanks.
This is Denny Morris, OHSAA Director of Officiating Development for Basketball and State Rules Interpreter, welcoming you to the 2021 Online State Rules Interpretation Meeting. A lot has changed in our world since last season, but hopefully with a few adjustments, we will be able to have a reasonably normal season. Let me remind you at the onset that flexibility and patience will be key this year. While this is not a rule change, if any coach should happen to ask about the proper color of gray, please refer them to the OHSAA office so that they can be advised on what shades are permissible to use as a legal away uniform. There are very few rule changes for this season, but we will go over them briefly, so let's get started. This is not really new. It was in place last year, but an emphasis for the timer, and we will need to review this with the timers before the game starts. We would like to have a warning signal sounded immediately after the disqualified player is notified that it's his fifth foul or after the injured player is removed, and then 15 seconds later a second signal indicating that the end of the time interval to replace that player has expired. And this graphic merely reiterates and demonstrates what I explained previously, that we will get two signals 15 seconds apart. And then common sense would dictate that the exception to this would be if an injured player is on the court and to the extent that the coach needs to come out to tend to him, we would not start that 15-second interval until the player has been safely removed from the court. And the penalty remains a technical foul charge to the head coach. This would be a direct technical if he fails to have a sub available at the end of that 15-second interval. And while this may be new for the Federation, the OHSAA and Ohio has had this policy in place for many years. If a coach is removed from a game for unsporting conduct, there must be another authorized school representative available to be responsible for the team. If no one else from that school is available to assume the responsibility, then the game is terminated and would be considered a forfeiture. This is merely an editorial change to correct an error that was made in the rule book last year that stated the official shall warn the head coach instead of saying the official may warn the head coach prior to issuing a technical foul. And as I have stated in years past, there's absolutely no requirement that a head coach receive any type of warning before being issued a technical foul. So really nothing has changed here. Those are all the rule changes for the upcoming season. Now let's take a look at a couple of the editorial changes. This is merely to clarify that if a technical foul occurs after the ball becomes dead at the end of a quarter or an extra period, then the next quarter or the next extra period would be started by administering the free throws. However, if at the end of the fourth quarter or an extra period, the score is tied and a technical foul is then assessed, that technical foul would also start the extra period. However, if the score is not tied and we need the results of the free throws to determine whether the game would continue or not, then those free throws would be administered as part of the preceding quarter or period. And remember, if they are administered as part of the preceding quarter, then we would begin the overtime period with a jump ball rather than a throw-in. Now let's take a look at the points of emphasis for the upcoming season. Our first point of emphasis deals with block charge, and this is probably the most difficult call that we have to make on a regular basis in a basketball game. Review the definition here that indicates that a blocker charge occurs when a defender impedes their opponent, or if they do not obtain a legal guarding position, then it becomes a blocking foul. There are a few basics that are necessary. One is that the defender must obtain an initial legal guarding position, and that means they have to have both feet touching the floor in bounds and initially facing their opponent within 6 feet. Once they have obtained that legal guarding position, they are allowed to move laterally or backwards. There's nothing in the rule that says the defender cannot move, and frequently that's what we hear from coaches is the defender was moving, they are allowed to move. Once they obtain their legal guarding position, they're also allowed to raise their hands in a normal stance and jump vertically. And this is the principle of verticality, and that extends all the way to the ceiling. Again, movement is permitted whereby a defender can turn or duck to absorb the shock of the contact. The player is never permitted to move into the path of an airborne shooter. And finally, a player who extends their arm, shoulder, hip, or leg into the path of an opponent is not considered to be in a legal guarding position. There is also a difference between guarding a player with the ball and without the ball. And so a couple points to remember: when the defender is guarding a player with the ball, time and distance are of no consequence. The defender can be as close to the opponent with the ball as they want short of contact, as long as they've arrived at that position first. The defender is never permitted to move into an opponent and cause contact. If the dribbler gets their shoulders past the front torso of the defender and contact occurs, This is deemed to be blocking on the defender and a foul on the defender. So for the defender to reobtain legal guarding position, all the criteria previously mentioned for guarding a person with the ball must be met. When an offensive player receives a long pass and his back is turned and he places one foot on the floor and crashes into a legally set defender, this should be ruled a player control foul. Oftentimes we see officials bail out by calling a traveling violation, and that is incorrect. That penalizes the defender for a good defensive play and position. Now, when we look at guarding a player without the ball, time and distance become key factors here. The distance allowed depends on the speed in which the offensive player is moving, but it is never to exceed 2 strides regardless of how fast they're moving. Once the defenders met the criteria with both feet touching the court in bounds and initially facing the opponent, the defender has obtained a legal guarding position and can move the same as if he or she were guarding a player with the ball. I will also take the time here to add that this year we will be providing some online presentations that you can view and count towards your local meeting credit. This is being done because some of the associations will not be able to meet as they normally do due to the COVID restrictions and social distancing, and so online credits will be available. I've asked Tim Gephardt to do a presentation on the block charge, and this will be an excellent presentation with a review of the principles that I just mentioned with lots of video included. So I would encourage you to watch that presentation when it becomes available. The second point of emphasis deals with the use of proper signals and the reporting area. We have mentioned this frequently throughout the years. Some officials like to stray from the signals that have been approved and that are indicated in the rule book. Some use signals that come from the NBA or from the NCAA. They are not approved for federation use. Some become overly theatrical, and that is also not desirable. So I'd encourage you to stick to the signals that are indicated, learn them, use them in the proper sequence. You are communicating to fans, coaches, players, everyone there, and so we need to be all on the same page and use the same signals. The third point of emphasis has to do with palming or carrying the ball. The rule references are there in reference to what constitutes a legal dribble and when the dribble begins and when the dribble ends and how it is done properly. Anything more than the palm being vertical to the ground would be considered palming the basketball and a violation. We need to enforce this consistently from the start of the season throughout. Our last point of emphasis is a clarification between intentional and flagrant fouls. There is a significant difference. A foul that's ruled intentional would occur when a player causes excessive contact even while playing the ball. An intentional foul should be ruled away from the ball when it's a non-basketball play, and these can be either considered personal or technical fouls. A flagrant foul is a violent foul or some type of non-contact act that's unacceptable behavior, and the penalty for a flagrant foul is immediate ejection. So the big difference when you use the term flagrant, that implies that the player is going to be ejected. And here are the rule references that define an intentional foul versus a flagrant foul. And then here are some of the examples of contact that would be considered an intentional foul. This is not an all-exclusive list, but some of the more common things that we see that we would want ruled as intentional. And unfortunately, you have to go back to the 2012-13 season to find this information, but this was a point of emphasis in that season. Unfortunately, they never really codified it into the rule book under intentional fouls, but as I have stressed since that year, any type of swinging elbow, and again, it must be a swinging elbow, which creates contact with an opponent, either in the head or neck area, this should be ruled an intentional foul. It could be also ruled a flagrant foul if it was severe enough, but it is not a common foul. This is an intentional foul. And then here is the definition of flagrant fouls. These are any type of foul that is violent, savage, uncivil, or some type of non-contact foul which displays unacceptable behavior. It may or may not be intentional. There are some examples listed there where it involves contact, and there's a multitude of things that we would consider unacceptable acts that would not involve contact, but would involve baiting or inciting an opponent or taunting an opponent. And certainly fighting is always to be deemed a flagrant act. I know it's oftentimes not a popular call and officials are reluctant to do this, but when indicated, we need to step up and call the intentional foul or the flagrant foul if appropriate. Fouling at the end of the game is strategic and is permitted by rule, but we need to know when it rises to the level of becoming an intentional foul and then have the conviction to make that call. It's also important that we get the first foul, because oftentimes when we miss that first foul, this is when things escalate and it becomes more and more physical and leads to either intentional fouls or flagrant fouls. Over the past few years, the question of what is legal and what is permissible in regards to headwear has occurred on numerous occasions. So here's a brief outline. If something's being worn for religious reasons, and assuming that it's non-abrasive or it's not hard or would not cause any injury, no OHSAA is required for, waiver is required for this. Be it male or female, they can wear a religious head covering without any type of waiver. If it's being worn for medical reasons, then this would require an OHSAA medical waiver. Remember that a face guard, which would be a molded material to the front of the face to protect usually a broken nose, that is legal by rule as long as there are no sharp edges. That would not require a waiver. And then anything that's being worn for cosmetic reasons must conform to the playing rules, or it may not be worn.
Congratulations, you have now completed the rules meeting. Please take a quick picture of this slide, and in addition, please email your athletic administrator to confirm your credit. If you have not confirmed your credit, be sure that you are entered into the school staff management using the correct email address. If this does not fix the issue, please email me directly and we will look into the problem. Thank you and best of luck this season.